murderer who had raped and killed 3 women in their rough, gang-populated division. They had been tailing the suspect on the street, waiting for backup to arrive to arrest the subject. The murderer had gotten sloppy on his last victim, leaving behind enough DNA evidence to finally arrest the bastard. Swinging his legs painfully over the side of the bed, Dante relived the last few moments of Patrick's life, flashing back to the instant when he'd lost his best friend. He and Patrick staying close enough to keep the suspect in their sight, the piercing sirens nearby screeching through the air, the suspect suddenly panicking and pulling out a semi-automatic pistol and starting to shoot. Why the suspect had suddenly cracked at that moment was still a mystery. The sirens had probably spooked a murderer who already knew the law was on his tail and closing in. Ironically, the sirens had had nothing to do with them taking down a murderer. They'd been wailing for a completely separate incident. Like the police were really going to announce they were coming for the asshole? Still, it had been enough to send the suspect over the edge, shooting at anyone or anything behind him without warning. Patrick had been the first to fall, with 1 bullet through the head. Dante had pulled out his Glock as he took several bullets from the shooter at close range, shielding Patrick with his larger body until he'd managed to get a kill shot in on the asshole shooter. At the time, Dante hadn't realized it was already too late for Patrick. The bullet through the head had killed his partner instantly. Luckily, the few civilians who had been hanging around on the street during the early morning hours had scattered, leaving Dante the only one injured. Patrick and the suspect, both dead. He'd been wearing his vest, but the close-range shots had caused him some blunt force trauma. However, it had saved his life, leaving him with only some cracked ribs instead of bullets through his chest. The shot to his face hadn't entered his skull, leaving him with only a nasty wound to his right cheek that extended up to his temple. The bullet to his right leg had passed through the flesh of his thigh, putting him in surgery after the incident, but it hadn't shattered the bone. The one to his left arm had just been a graze.
Lucky bastard.
Dante could almost hear his partner's voice saying those exact words to him jokingly, but he was feeling far from fortunate at the moment. He'd been injured badly enough to spend a week in the hospital, unable to attend Patrick's funeral, unable to say a final goodbye to his best friend. Karen and Ben had visited him after his surgery, Patrick's wife tearfully telling him how glad Patrick would have been that Dante had survived, and actually thanking him for trying to protect her husband. Neither one of them blamed Dante for what had happened to their beloved husband and father. Yet Dante couldn't get past the fact that he wished it would have been him instead of his partner, that he had somehow let Patrick down by not being the one to die. Survivor's guilt. That's what the department psychologist was calling it, telling Dante it was common, considering the circumstances. That comment had made Dante want to send the little head-shrinking bastard across the room with his fist. What the hell was normal about wishing himself dead?
You okay?
His brother Grady's low, concerned voice came from the doorway of the small bedroom.
Need anything? We're only about an hour from landing. I thought I heard something crash in here.
It was ironic that Dante and his siblings had always wanted to protect Grady, too often unsuccessfully, from being the primary target of their alcoholic, abusive father. And now Grady was the brother who was trying to take care of him. Every single one of his siblings had been at the hospital in Los Angeles, flying in as soon as they had heard that he was injured. But he was going home with Grady to his vacation home in Maine, a house he owned but had only seen briefly a few times since it had been constructed. Every one of the Sinclair siblings had a home on the Amesport Peninsula, but only Grady had actually made his house a permanent home. Dante hoped he could escape there, stop reliving the last moments of Patrick's life in his nightmares. Right now, the only thing he could see every time he closed his eyes was Patrick dying. At the time, Dante hadn't realized that Patrick was taking his last breath as his friend hit the ground with a gasp, his eyes still open and his head covered in blood.